A murder case that captivated the nation's capital some 15 years ago, back in the spotlight. Chandra Levy was a Washington intern who was having an affair with a married congressman before she disappeared and was later found dead. In May 2001, Chandra Levy's disappearance was reported. In May 2002, her body was discovered. In November of 2010, Ingmar Guandike was convicted in her killing. But in June of last year, a judge granted Guandike a new trial. And now, all charges have been dropped with no known suspects. The U.S. Attorney in D.C. says the reason is because, quote, based on recent unforeseen developments that were investigated over the past week, well, those charges are going away. Joining me now, Rod Wheeler, former Washington homicide detective, and David Bruno, a criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor and trial attorney. Welcome to you both, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Good to be here, Shannon.
All right, Rod, we have been picking apart this case for more than 10 years. Where do you think we go from here? I mean, the one guy who was jailed all this time over this has now essentially, at least legally, technically, been cleared.
Right.
Are there any other suspects? What do we do?
Right. Well, here's a couple of things that's very important. Number one, I said back when they actually brought charges against Guandike on one of the Fox shows, I said, Guandike is not your murderer. He's not the guy that killed Chandra Levy. Look, I was very familiar with that case, Shannon. I actually walked Rock Creek Park, the area where her remains were found. Guandike was historically a career criminal, but he was a sex offender. He wasn't necessarily a murderer. All right, so where does the case go now? The case is reopened. There's going to be a new set of homicide detectives that's going to get fresh eyes, a fresh look to what they have now and see if they can come up with any other suspects.
Okay, and I want to read a quote now from Gary Condit's attorney. He was the congressman who was apparently having an affair with her at the time she disappeared. Quote, the failure of authorities to bring formal closure to this tragedy after 15 years is very disappointing, but in no way alters the fact that Mr. Condit was long ago completely exonerated by authorities in connection with Ms. Levy's death. All right, David, there will be those who say there's always going to be some sort of cloud over him if there is not some resolution to this case. And I understand one of the problems here was with testimony from somebody who, was working with prosecutors and may not have told the truth. In the end, wasn't believable enough to sustain this case against Guandike.
Sure. Well, the government relied on the jailhouse informant. And as a former prosecutor, I know that when you put all your eggs in one basket, you better have corroborating evidence to support. And the government didn't have any of it. They solely relied on this individual that said, I was in jail with the defendant and he confessed. Well, it turns out that since then, he's been running his mouth on recorded statements saying, I lied, I did it to get protective custody and a better living situation. So now the government is faced with this case. They have to either retry or dismiss. And in light of the impeachment evidence, the incredible evidence, they have elected to dismiss.
Yeah, and for impeachment, just break down for people, is basically it undermines the credibility of this individual's statements that they've made to this point.
Sure.
Rod, I want to ask you at this point, you talked about a whole new set of homicide detectives and tackling this. What happens to the evidence after all of this time? I mean, I assume it's been preserved. I assume that, it's in good custody in the meantime.
Right, but there wasn't a whole lot of evidence, Shannon. That was the other issue with the Chandra Levy case. There wasn't a ton of evidence. The only thing that we really had back then was just her remains, and that was the bones. Now, real quickly, here's something you haven't heard anywhere else. If this were my case, if this was a homicide that I was reopening, you know who I'd be taking a look at right now? I'd take a close look at Jesse Matthews. Now, some of the viewers may be saying, well, who is Jesse Matthews? Remember, Jesse Matthews, Shannon, is the guy that was recently convicted of killing, I think, Morgan Harrington and Hannah Graham down in Charlottesville, Virginia. Well, here's the kicker with all of this. In 2002, Jesse Matthews was accused of rape of two females that look almost identical when you look at race and age of Chandra Levy. Two individuals at Liberty University. So Jesse Matthews was not far from this area in 2001. That's an area or an aim that I would be definitely looking at right now.
David, very interesting point there. Potentially.
Sure. While there's an interest to continue to investigate this case, there's always going to be that cloud over a future prosecution. I mean, an individual has been prosecuted and convicted. There's third-party guilt potentially out there. So if there is another suspect developed or another charge of homicide lodged, it's going to be tough to prove.
All right. David, Rod, great to see you both. Thanks for shedding some light on this case.
Thank you.